Welcome to Westport Chamber Chats. And in Westport Chamber Chats, we talk to members of Westport Chamber of Commerce who are either blow-ins like myself or locals. And they talk about themselves and what they've been involved in over the years. And then we talk about the Chamber and other little issues around town. So tonight's guest is James O Doherty, all the way from Carlow. He had a long circuitous route, and he will tell us about that now, this minute. Now, James.
Thank you, Dr. Whyte.
There you go. Yeah.
Yes. And it's a pleasure to be invited to participate in Chamber Chats. Just a very quick piece about my background. As Dr. Whyte said, I'm originally a Carlow man, where I was born and reared. And in the early 80s, I had finished my mechanical engineering degree and realized that the economy in Ireland was not very positive, even though I had a job and a reasonably well-paying job because it was a state job. I decided to take off to Canada. I went to Canada for about 7 years. I ended up working for 5 years with Texaco Canada, based in Calgary, but working right across Western Canada. And then they asked me to move to Montreal, where I was working in Atlantic Canada, looking after the English-speaking provinces of Atlantic Canada who reported into Quebec. This was shortly after the Parti Québécois had brought through their independence referenda. Actually, the first time I was in Montreal was in '82, and it was a little bit uncomfortable being an Anglo arriving in Montreal in '82. By '86, when I went back with Texaco, it was settled down a little bit, but they had an infamous language law, Law 101, which required that all people could only speak French, or you could only hire French speaking unless you had an English speaking province reporting into Quebec. So they changed the reporting, Texaco changed the reporting lines for the Atlantic Canada provinces from reporting directly to the head office in Toronto to report into Montreal, which allowed them to recruit bilingual staff.
And what was your job there? What were you doing?
I was a project engineer working with the marketing department. When you say you work for Texaco as an engineer, people immediately think that you were in the exploration or extraction side of
digging holes in the ground.
Business. Yes, but I was a long way from that. I was managing building service stations, upgrade of service stations. We did a complete rebranding of Texaco at the time. It was a multi-million-dollar projects, and changed the business model basically, because they had all been small service bays, as they called them, for older cars, which of course needed a lot of oil change and so forth. And as cars got better, there was less demand on service bays, and it became a little bit specialized. So you had the people who specialized on tires or in exhaust or what have you. So we were knocking garages basically and changing them into what we call C-stores, convenience stores, the sort of thing that you see all over Ireland now as well.
And how did you like Canada?
I liked it quite a bit. It's very nice, but it's very cold.
And very warm.
And the winters are long. In Montreal, there's a lot of snow. In Calgary, there isn't much snow, but it's a long, hard winter at the same time. No, I enjoyed my time there, but and it's the sort of place I often say, if I had to leave Ireland, I would be very happy to go to Canada. But they say the savage loves his native shore, and particularly when I came to the point of raising a family, I wanted to do that in Ireland, not in Canada. Mm-hmm. And I got lucky. I came home in '86 to get married to my good wife, who's originally from Roscommon, whom I had met before I went to Canada and who had come out after me, mm-hmm. if I can say that. And we got married in '86, and I had a lucky break. I went to the All-Ireland final, Kerry versus Tyrone. And I met a good buddy of mine from Kerry at the match. And he said if I was thinking of coming home, he knew of a job that would suit me. Mm. And that job was as a project engineer with Allergan in Westport. So I said, sure, I might as well do the interview. So that's what we did for my honeymoon, an interview with Allergan in Westport.
Mhm.
My first time in Westport, we arrived down probably for 9 o'clock meeting with Allergan. So we drove from we stayed with my sister-in-law in Galway. We drove down to Westport, said goodbye to my wife at 9 and said we'd try and meet. There was no mobile phones in those days. So I said, why don't you come back and just check and check. Anyway, turned out that we eventually met up, my wife and myself, with a whole bunch of others, brought down to Cox's Bar on Bridge Street at about 7 o'clock that night, because they knew I was going back to Canada and they'd spent the whole day talking to me and kept me there. Jim Kiley, Maurice Silk, Colin O'Neill, and all these guys. And we went down. Michael Kittrick was leaving Allergan to go to California that day. So they said, why don't you come down and just meet some more of the gang? They were having a going away in John Cox's Bar. So we did that, and then we left and headed off to Dublin, back to Canada. And the job offer came and we decided to come home. We came here, St. Patrick's Day 1987, we arrived in Westport to find that the parade was cancelled. Wet, miserable day. And John Kiernan, who was the HR manager at the time, took it upon himself to look after us on the day that was in it.
Back to normal.
Yeah. We came on a one-year contract in 87, and here we are in the year 2020, still here. So that might say a lot about Westport, I think.
And how long did you stay in Allergan?
I stayed in Allergan for 3 years.
3 years.
3 years, yeah.
And then?
Really interesting place to work and very dynamic. The whole atmosphere in the company at that time, the whole ethos of Allergan just grabbed me right from the start, and I fitted right in. I felt energized and I felt like I belonged from day one. And at some stage we recognized in Allergan that the sterilization technology that was in use at the time was being phased out, and we needed to find a new technology. And the decision was made to look for an irradiation company that would come and set up an irradiation plant. Allergan didn't want to do it themselves, didn't want to do it in-house, but were really interested to attract a company to do it in Westport for economic reasons. So Allergan figured with a strong base volume and having taken the initiative that they should reap the benefit of having somebody come and set up in Westport rather than somewhere else in Ireland. So I was part of a team that went to meet, to identify and meet contractors active at that time. And a Dutch company, Gammaster, which was a subsidiary of a big Dutch cooperative called OPG, were enticed to come to Westport. And at some point, I jumped from the Allergan side to the Gammaster side and set up the plant in Westport in 1990.
You managed it, yeah?
I managed it. I managed the project, and then I took on the role of managing the sterilization service. So I was the GM there from the startup, and stayed at that. And also in about 1999, I think, we purchased a company in Sweden, and I took responsibility for integrating that company for 3 years as well. The end of that period, Gammaster was sold by our parent company in the Holland. We were bought by a company called Isotron. And what was interesting was Isotron was the other company that we approached when we were starting off. We went looking. They were an English-based, a small English public company who had actually come into Ireland in the meantime to build a different technology down in Tullamore in the Midlands. So they ended up buying Gammaster, and because of they already had an operation in Ireland, there wasn't room to continue as a GM in Westport. I took a corporate role with them for about a year, and probably my family was quite young at that stage. They were all in school, and I decided that travel and certainly relocating to the UK, which is what they wanted me to do, wasn't on the cards. So I parted ways, and I had made the tough decision that the most important thing was to stay in the west of Ireland. I'm not sure it was a tough decision, but economically it was a more challenging decision. Stay in the west of Ireland and take my chances rather than follow a career path. So I ended up then working in a number of different roles in different places, in Ballina and actually in Ballinasloe as well for a while, and did some freelance work. And in about 2010, I joined the rehab group in Castlebar in a role of, we call it business development, even though it's not strictly business development, but it's about funding and chasing funding opportunities for the organisation. Yeah. So that's my background. Maybe now we'll talk a little bit about the chamber.
You got involved in a bit of private business. Did you have a restaurant? Or you?
Yes, my wife has probably has as varied a career as I have. She was an ex-banker, and when we came to Westport, she got back in with Bank of Ireland, where she had previously worked. First of all, doing relief during the summer time when there was always extra demand, and then they brought in a new bank assistant role, which she went to for a while. But we were starting our family. We had young kids, and that didn't suit really. So she left that, and then she worked in auctioneering with Peter Toohey and O'Toole and Toohey now. Toohey O'Toole now. And God knows what else she did. She ran a Montessori school for a year or two down in the Grove. And then with a partner, she took over. Oh yeah, and she worked for the Rehab Group for National Learning Network for a couple of years on project-based contracts. And when she finished up her last contract, an opportunity came to take over the Creel, which was being sold by Julie and Frank that owned it, that had started it. And with a friend of Patricia's, Claire Hickey, who was a chef, they took over the Creel. And Claire left after about a year, and Trish took the business, sole ownership of the business, and drove it on for 10 years before she sold it to Aoife O'Neill and Tom Burke. And she wasn't at all happy not to be working, of course. It wouldn't be her style. So for the last 4 years, she's been working in Delphi Fishing Lodge as the front of house manager.
Okay. So you have plenty of experience of all shapes and forms.
Sure, yeah. It gives you insights into different types of business, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And what do you think of Westport?
What do I think of Westport?
You're done with
what sense?
Like Westport, obviously like Westport. You hung around it once you found out about it,
Yeah. There's a great character here in Westport, Shamie Walsh, who said to me many years ago, he says, "You like Westport and Westport likes you." And I think what he means was, yeah, I do like Westport, and we find Westport a very hospitable and welcoming place. We made a lot of friends here and really enjoyed our life, made our life here.
So you've had a long association with the Chamber of Commerce then?
I have. Very long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what do you think
when I started up, say that again?
What do you think of the Chamber of Commerce? Well, you're about to tell us.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't have joined it and stayed with it for a long time if I didn't see some purpose in being in the Chamber, or some purpose of the Chamber that I wanted to contribute to. Back in 1990, when we were starting Gamister, we looked for acceptance by the people of Westport for the project. The fact that it uses a radioactive source didn't make it immediately welcome. So people had to understand what that meant and whether there was any potential danger or threat to the community. So we worked very hard to get acceptance. And I have to say, when you look at how well we came through statutory objections, which are fine, I thought it was useful to air people's thoughts about and fears about the project. And if you look back over 30 years, not once have you heard anybody complaining about its presence. So I think that proved the point that we had a safe project and that we won acceptance from the local population. But shortly after we started up, we had the support of the IDA, of course. And I was aware that people within the chamber were looking to leverage our presence in town to attract other companies to come to Westport. And I thought that it would be appropriate that I would be part of that rather than sitting on the outside. I didn't think that would work particularly well. And I was a little bit nervous that maybe, these were people with good intentions that might not understand where we fitted into the picture. And I had relationships that had to be maintained properly with people like the IDA. So that got me involved. And then for very many years, my role within the chamber was always on the industrial side, industrial subcommittees that we ran. Because in those years, we were really trying to leverage the presence of Allergan and ourselves, I suppose, and opportunities to attract FDI primarily into the manufacturing sector. So we did things like work hard to have industrial land zoned. And as one measure of success, and one way of looking at it is, every time we got a new piece of land zoned industrial, Allergan expanded into it, basically. The people at Port West, the Hughes Group at Port West, took parts of it too, of course. So I won't ignore that. But by and large, every time we did get additional land, Allergan eventually ended up taking it on.
It's very well populated land.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There is no spare industrial zone land in Westport at the moment. I think it's something we'll have to keep an eye on.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, you were in the chamber and you were stuck with it.
I was in the chamber and I stuck with it, is right. So, yes, I was in the chamber, and of course, like a lot of people, and when you get involved in organizations like this, you probably wax and wane in terms of your contribution and your absolute involvement. It was important for me to stay involved because of the role that I had, and I was happy to stay involved. It was another way of meeting and getting to know contacts in the IDA and staying in touch with the county council and the political system. And if you think at the time, like Galveston had 10, 15 people employed. So in terms of our employment numbers, we would never have had any clout with county council or with politicians. But as part of the Westport Chamber, I had access and I had clout. I was part of that voice of business and industry in Westport.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was useful and I thought that was worthwhile. I did respect the institution in many ways that I had joined. It had been in place for a long time. And like so much in Westport Chamber hits way above its weight and makes Westport a more important town in the forums in which the Westport Chamber participates than, let's say, is deserved by its size, or maybe I put that another way, in comparison to towns, urban areas of bigger sizes, we carry much more strength. Part of that I've always recognized, and it's been said to me by so many people around the country from outside, part of that is our ability to work together as a single entity within the town. It's really one of our strengths, and it resonates with me because I believe in cooperation. I believe in working together. So I think the Chamber has been really if you like, a living experiment in the effectiveness of working together. Doesn't mean we always get on, to be honest. Not supposed to. But when you're trying to come to a solution, it's about finding the solution that works best for the most people in the town. Actually, one of the earliest lessons I ever remember was a debate that we had within the chamber, and we seemed to be going around in circles, and somebody called for a vote. And the late Sean Staunton, who was always such a positive influence within the chamber, said, no, we shouldn't have a vote, because it wasn't about majority rule. It was about coming to an agreement that everybody could sign up to, a compromise that everybody accepted. And I have to say two things. What I remember, and I may be wrong in this, but I remember that a meeting that wasn't going anywhere had gone down into two separate camps, came together for a solution on the back of that. But I always remember his comments, and it's been a guiding principle for me within the chamber, but in a lot of other forums since. You cannot get people to commit to seeing through any project if they don't believe in it. And if they are the losing side in a vote, well, then you've lost the support of all those people.
And how do you manage democracy?
Democracy is messy, so I'm not saying it's easy. I have a friend, Helen Fahy, who's a Westport lady, but she's married and lives out in Lewisburg. And she spent many years working in rural development with Teagasc. And she always talks about that too, that you have to work with people to bring them with you. It's no decision can be made and carried by a majority or enforced. You have to win hearts and minds. And you do that by not taking fixed positions, by listening to arguments, by trying to resolve differences. It doesn't always work the way that you want. It can be quite frustrating at times, but the benefits are worth the effort, that's for sure.
Are there many other things that the chamber have been involved with over the years now that you know about? I mean, there are lots of things that if we...
There's lots of things. No, I think, you see, the work of the chamber is tricky to understand, particularly when you're not involved. I mean, if you're on the outside looking in, you don't see maybe the influence that the chamber has. And on a lot of projects that the chamber has been influential in the outcomes, for a number of reasons, good reasons, many of them, the chamber doesn't get the recognition for its input. So very often on political decisions, the chamber has managed to make the case, and maybe has even, let's say, stiffened the resolve of the politicians to deliver. But if it's a political decision, chamber's not in the business of taking the kudos for it, and the politician rightly takes the kudos, and that's fine too. So that's one of the areas where, let's say, our contribution is probably misunderstood. We are a lobbying group, and a lot of the outcomes of our lobbying are long term. I'm going to talk about that now in a minute, but so you don't, when the result is not immediate to the input, it's easy to lose sight of the benefit of your input, the causal effect that you've had in the decision that was made. I'll give one example very quickly. The chamber, when I arrived, lobbied very, very strongly for the retention of mainline rail into Westport. And at the time, coming out of the 80s, mainline branches were being closed down. We do know that the mainline to Sligo almost went, and a lot of people in Westport Chamber reckon that Westport Chamber alerted Sligo interests to the fact that their mainline was being closed down, and they managed to lobby for its retention at that time. But we worked very hard to maintain the Westport line as well. And I have to say, arriving here, I didn't understand the importance of it in the early 90s. I do now, absolutely. We used to meet with the regional Western regional manager on an annual basis. And I suppose part of it was through those meetings I started to understand the key role that mainline access has played in the development of tourism in Westport. It provides the access that's so important to tourism. Part of our lobbying was for the early morning train. The argument was always that if you want to put particularly non-leisure business traffic onto the rail, it has to be in Dublin early. It's no point leaving here first thing in the morning, but getting into Dublin mid-morning or late morning. So the early morning train has been a very important part of the services being delivered by Air North Éireann from Westport, providing access to the capital. And I think that the Chamber initiated it and was the most vocal in clamouring for that early morning train. Now you can take the early morning train, be in Dublin for a 9 o'clock meeting. You can have a medical appointment or an appointment with professional advisors or whatever, and be home again that evening. It's a fantastic service.
Yeah. So to bring us back to nowadays, what do you think of the present situation with COVID-19?
It's very tricky, isn't it?
Very tricky, yeah. It just closed down the world.
We're in new territory, all of us, every single one of us. The well-known American investor Warren Buffett had a recent commentary because he's just sold off so much of his assets and he had to explain it. He's a public company after all. He said in 2000 trouble, we saw that there was a bit of weakening under the track, but that's okay. We knew how to fix that weakening. So he was prepared to invest because he knew the fundamentals of what he was getting into. This time he said something to the effect, somebody has taken the train and parked it in the siding. We don't know why and we don't know when it's coming back. It's not that there's a disruption that we can understand and fix. It's that no one is really sure. So there's a huge amount of unknown, not just in the impact of this COVID, but in the long-term effect of it. I mean, it's quite likely to change societal norms, certainly over the next 5 years. Whether we forget about it eventually, I suspect we will, as we've forgotten about things like famine and plague and polio, and get on back into a different way of life. But certainly for 5 years, we won't forget the COVID. Most of the predictions are it's going to be around for that time anyway. In the meantime, there are risks, I think, to things like the EU, globalization, politics across Europe, across globally, and whether they may have more lasting effects, who can say? One thing I fear very much is that we're heading towards a hard Brexit, which will make a difficult situation even worse. We'll have to see how that plays out.
The perfect storm.
Perfect storm, yeah.